My son called me clingy, bitter, and dead to him. He blocked my number, returned my letters, and told his wife I was just a lonely old woman who couldn't accept that he'd moved on. For 3 years he acted like I'd already been buried. But I wasn't buried yet, and I wasn't finished. While he thought I'd fade away quietly into irrelevance, I was planning something that would make him understand what death really feels like. The slow, suffocating kind that comes when everything you love disappears one piece at a time. This is how I taught my son that when you declare someone dead, you better make sure they can't come back to haunt every corner of the life you built on their bones. I raised Marcus with hands that knew every kind of work and a heart that never learned to quit. After his father died in a factory accident when Marcus was only 8, I became everything. Mother, father, provider, cheerleader. I worked double shifts at Miller's Diner on Route 9. My feet swelling in shoes held together with duct tape, just to keep us in our little apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. The smell of fresh bread would drift up through the floorboards every morning, mixing with the coffee I brewed strong enough to wake the dead. I saved every tip, every spare dollar, skipping meals so Marcus could have name-brand sneakers and school supplies that didn't scream, "Poor kid." When other mothers packed their children elaborate lunches, I made sure Marcus had 2 sandwiches and a bag of chips, even if it meant I ate peanut butter crackers for dinner. I volunteered for every PTA committee, every school fundraiser, every soccer team carpool because I wanted him to feel like he belonged to a family that mattered. When Marcus got accepted to State University's engineering program, I sold my mother's china set, the only nice thing I owned, and pawned the wedding ring I'd worn for 20 years to help cover his dorm fees. I told him it was an investment in our future, that someday we'd laugh about the ramen noodle dinners and the second-hand textbooks I'd highlighted in 3 different colors from previous students. I believed that love, real love, always comes back around when it matters most. Those college years were filled with hope and pride. Marcus would call home every week, excited about his classes and professors. During summer breaks, he'd work construction jobs and bring his paychecks home, insisting I keep half for myself even though I tried to put it all toward his education. He'd joke that someday he'd buy me a house with a garden and a wraparound porch where I could sit and watch grandchildren play. We dreamed together about the life his education would build for both of us. Marcus graduated summa cum laude, landed a job at Techwell Industries, and married Sarah McKinnon, a sweet girl from Riverside Heights whose family owned vacation homes in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard. I was so proud watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, knowing every sacrifice had been worth it. For the first few years he called every Sunday after church, visited for holidays, and even brought Sarah to the diner to meet my co-workers and regular customers. "This is my mom," he'd say with genuine warmth, his arm around my shoulders. "She's the reason I'm here. She worked her fingers to the bone to get me through school." Sarah would smile warmly and compliment the pie, asking for the recipe and genuinely seeming to enjoy our conversations. I thought I'd gained not just a daughter-in-law but a daughter. Those early years felt like the happy ending I'd worked so hard to reach. The distance started small, the way winter creeps in. One missed call here, one shortened visit there, one holiday spent with Sarah's family this year because they haven't seen us in so long. When I asked about grandchildren, Marcus would change the subject to work projects or home renovations. When I suggested family dinners at my apartment, he was always too busy with client meetings or social obligations I wasn't invited to. The birthday cards I sent started coming back unopened, marked "Return to Sender" in Sarah's careful handwriting. The Christmas gifts I carefully selected, a cashmere scarf for her, a leather wallet for him, sat untouched in their boxes when I visited their new house, a sprawling suburban palace with a 3-car garage and a security system that made me feel like an intruder. I noticed how Sarah would glance at Marcus whenever I spoke, like she was waiting for him to handle an uncomfortable situation. She'd check her watch during our conversations, mention appointments that needed her attention, or suddenly remember phone calls she had to return. Marcus would follow her lead, cutting our visits short with promises to catch up soon that never materialized. The exclusion became more obvious as months passed. I'd see photos on Facebook of family gatherings I wasn't invited to, birthday parties where my absence was so complete it was like I'd never existed. Sarah's mother got the front row seat at their anniversary dinner. Her father walked her down the aisle at their church blessing ceremony, an event I learned about through the society pages of the local newspaper. Then came the day I called to tell Marcus about my diabetes diagnosis. I'd been in regional medical center for 3 days, scared and alone, watching other patients receive visitors while I stared at game shows on the ceiling-mounted television. The doctor had explained about insulin injections, dietary changes, the importance of having someone check on me regularly. I thought surely this would matter to my son, that health scares were what brought families back together. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered, her voice immediately taking on that polite but distant tone she used with telemarketers. "Oh, hi Ruth," she said, like my call was an unexpected inconvenience. "Marcus is in a conference call with Tokyo. You know how these international deals can drag on. I'll tell him you called." I waited by the phone for 6 hours. Marcus never called back. When I tried again the next day, the number went straight to voicemail. The day after that, my call was blocked entirely. The final blow came on a rainy Thursday morning in March. I'd been trying to reach Marcus for 2 weeks about updating my emergency contact information at the hospital. Dr. Patel had emphasized how important it was to have family listed, someone who could make medical decisions if I became incapacitated. Marcus was all I had. No siblings, no cousins, no one else who shared my blood. I decided to drive to his office at Techwell Industries, thinking maybe face-to-face conversation would break through whatever wall had grown between us. The receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer who'd always been friendly during my previous visits, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Patterson," she said with genuine warmth. "Here to see Marcus? He's had such a busy week with the Morrison account, but I'm sure he'll make time for his mom." I nodded, adjusting my best coat, the navy wool one I'd bought for his wedding 5 years earlier. Jennifer picked up the phone, dialed his extension, and I watched her expression change from pleasant anticipation to confusion to uncomfortable embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, hanging up and avoiding my eyes. "He says he's unavailable right now. Maybe you could try calling later." But I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. I sat in that sterile lobby with its leather chairs and corporate art, watching other families embrace, watching other mothers matter to their children. I saw a gray-haired woman bring lunch to her son in accounting. I watched a father and daughter laugh over shared photos on her phone. I counted every minute on the wall clock, every footstep in the hallway, every elevator ding that might bring my son back to me. 2 hours later, Marcus finally emerged from the elevator, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble floor. He looked right through me like I was part of the furniture, his face carefully blank as he headed toward the exit. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking from the cold and the weight. "Marcus," I said just loud enough for him to hear. He stopped, turned, and the look in his eyes was colder than the February wind rattling the lobby windows. Other employees slowed their pace, sensing drama in the air. Jennifer pretended to shuffle papers while obviously listening. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not even trying to lower his voice or move our conversation somewhere private. "I just wanted to talk to you," I said, hearing my voice crack despite my efforts to stay strong. "About my medical forms, about us, about why you won't return my calls." "There is no us," he said sharply, loud enough for the gathering audience to hear every word. "I have a life now, Mom. A real life with real responsibilities. I can't keep being dragged down by someone who refuses to accept that I've moved on. The words hit like a physical blow. Dragged down? Marcus, I'm your mother. I just want to be part of your life. You're dead to me, he said, each word deliberate and cutting. Do you understand what that means? Dead. Finished. Over. Stop calling, stop showing up, stop existing in my world. Some people know when to disappear. Learn. The lobby fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. Jennifer stared at her computer screen. The security guard studied his shoes. A delivery man pretended to be very interested in his clipboard. Then Marcus walked away, his expensive shoes clicking a rhythm of dismissal against the marble floor, leaving me standing there with tears streaming down my face and something dark and angry building in my chest like a storm about to break. That night, I sat in my small apartment above the bakery, surrounded by old photos of Marcus and me. His first day of kindergarten with the superhero lunchbox I'd saved for months to buy, his high school graduation where he'd thanked me in his valedictorian speech, the day he bought his first car with money I'd helped him save from my tip jar. I thought about what he'd said. Some people know when to disappear. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time for me to disappear. But not in the way he expected. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making lists. The same methodical approach I'd used to budget our groceries when money was tight, to plan his college applications when the deadline seemed impossible, to organize every aspect of our life when I was the only parent left to do it. Marcus had built his perfect life on a foundation I'd laid with my own sweat and sacrifice. He had connections in this town because I'd introduced him to people. Customers at the diner who became mentors, church members who offered internships, neighbors who recommended him for jobs. He had credit history because I'd co-signed his first loans when no bank would look at a college student with no assets. He had professional references because I'd asked my regulars, business owners, teachers, city council members, to give him summer work and career guidance. But if I was dead to him, then maybe it was time for all those connections to die too. I opened my address book, the one I'd kept since Marcus was a teenager, its pages soft from years of handling and filled with phone numbers and relationships built over decades. I was the woman who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who brought casseroles during difficult times and never forgot a favor. I'd spent 20 years weaving myself into the fabric of this community, and now I was going to start pulling threads. If Marcus wanted me to disappear, I'd give him exactly what he asked for. But when I vanished, I'd take every piece of the life I'd helped him build along with me. I started with small moves, quiet conversations that felt like catching up with old friends. Mrs. Henderson, who owned Henderson and Associates Accounting, called me back within an hour of my message. She'd known me since Marcus was in middle school, when I'd started bringing her coffee and homemade muffins during tax season. "Ruth," she said warmly, "I was just thinking about you. How's that brilliant boy of yours? I saw in the paper that his company landed that big government contract." "That's actually why I'm calling, Helen," I said carefully. "Marcus and I have had some serious difficulties. He's made it very clear that he doesn't want me in his life anymore. In fact, he told me I was dead to him and needed to stop existing in his world." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, Helen spoke, her voice shocked and hurt. "Ruth, I had no idea. Marcus never mentioned any problems. He's always seemed so respectful when he comes in." "He's entitled to his choices," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. "I just wanted to make sure you knew that any professional considerations or personal favors you might have extended to him because of our friendship, well, that connection no longer exists. I thought you should know." Helen was quiet for another moment. "I appreciate you telling me, Ruth. I have to say I'm disappointed. After everything you've done for that boy." Mrs. Henderson's firm had been handling Marcus and Sarah's taxes for 3 years at a significant family discount. They'd also provided business consulting for a side venture Marcus was trying to launch, again at reduced rates because of Helen's affection for me. More importantly, Helen sat on the city's Small Business Development Board, which had recently approved a low-interest loan for Marcus's consulting startup. By the end of the week, Marcus received a formal letter on Henderson and Associates letterhead stating that due to changing business relationships and scheduling constraints, his account would be transferred to another firm. The new firm would charge standard rates, nearly triple what he'd been paying. The business consulting contract was terminated immediately, and Helen quietly mentioned to the development board that she'd had concerns about the character and family values of one of their recent loan recipients. Next was Tom Bradley, who owned Bradley Construction, the largest building company in 3 counties. Tom had hired Marcus for summer work throughout high school and college, teaching him about leadership and work ethic while paying him wages that helped fund his education. More importantly, Bradley Construction had recently won the contract to build a major addition to Marcus and Sarah's house, a project that was already halfway finished and represented their biggest investment outside their mortgage. I'd brought Tom meals every day when his wife Linda was going through chemotherapy. I'd watched his kids grow up, attended their graduations, helped organize fundraisers when his youngest daughter needed surgery they couldn't afford. Tom's loyalty to me ran deeper than most people knew. "Tom," I said when I called him on a Saturday morning, catching him at home where we could talk privately, "I need to tell you something difficult about Marcus, and I want you to hear it from me first." Tom listened without interrupting as I explained what had happened at Marcus's office, my voice breaking at the right moments to convey genuine hurt without seeming manipulative. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I could hear Linda washing dishes in the background. "Ruth," Tom said finally, his voice thick with anger, "I can't believe this. After everything you've done for that boy. The way you sacrificed, the way you worked yourself to the bone. I don't want to cause problems for his business," I continued carefully. "I know you've got contracts and obligations, but I also can't pretend everything is fine when my own son has erased me from his life so completely." "Contracts can be broken," Tom said grimly, "especially when you find out you're working for someone who treats their mother like garbage." By Monday morning, the construction crew had disappeared from Marcus's property, leaving the addition half-finished with exposed beams and plastic sheeting flapping in the wind like surrender flags. Tom sent a professional letter citing scheduling conflicts and resource reallocation. But when Marcus called to negotiate, Tom's secretary said Mr. Bradley was unavailable and would remain so indefinitely. I moved through my contact list systematically, each call feeling like closing a door but not on my life, on his. I spoke with Janet Morrison at First National Bank, who'd approved Marcus's mortgage based partly on my personal recommendation and 20-year banking relationship. I called Dr. Richard Steinberg, the veterinarian who'd been treating Marcus and Sarah's expensive purebred golden retrievers at a family discount because I'd helped him through veterinary school by letting him study at the diner during slow hours. I contacted Father Mackenzie at St. Mary's, where I'd been volunteering for over a decade and where Marcus and Sarah had recently started attending services. I reached out to Carol Winters, who managed the Riverside Country Club where Marcus networked with potential clients, gaining access because I'd cleaned Carol's house twice a week for 5 years to help pay for Marcus's college textbooks. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock at Marcus's behavior, disappointment in someone they'd trusted, and quiet promises that business relationships based on personal loyalty to me would be reevaluated. The real turning point came when I approached Dr. Melissa Carr, the city's most prominent fertility specialist and a woman I'd served coffee to every Tuesday morning for 8 years at the diner. Melissa was also the doctor Sarah had been consulting about their struggles to conceive. A fact I'd learned during one of Sarah's rare attempts at meaningful conversation months earlier. "Ruth," Melissa said warmly when I called her private number, "how lovely to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. I've missed seeing you at the diner since you retired. I'm calling about a very difficult family situation," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I need you to know that Marcus has completely severed our relationship. He told me in front of his coworkers that I was dead to him and needed to stop existing in his world." Melissa's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "That's absolutely horrible, Ruth. I can't imagine how painful that must be for you. I'm trying to respect his wishes and remove myself from his life completely," I continued. "But I wanted to make sure you understood that any professional relationships or personal considerations extended to him or his wife because of our friendship, well, that connection no longer exists." The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might hang up. Finally, Melissa spoke, her voice carefully controlled but clearly furious. "Ruth, I want you to know that I've always valued our friendship immensely. You've been nothing but kind and supportive to me over the years. What Marcus has done is not just cruel. It's a reflection of character that frankly disgusts me." She paused, and I could hear her taking notes on something. "A man who treats his mother this way, well, let's just say it makes me seriously reconsider my professional relationships with his family." 2 weeks later, Sarah received a letter from Dr. Carr's office stating that due to full patient loads and changing practice priorities, they would no longer be able to provide fertility consultation services. The letter recommended several other specialists, all of whom had waiting lists of 6 months or longer and charged twice as much as Dr. Carr's practice. But I wasn't finished. The real masterpiece came when I visited Judge Patricia Williams, who'd been eating at my diner every Friday for 12 years, always ordering the same thing: chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, and sweet tea. Patricia had recently been assigned to oversee the zoning appeals for Marcus's tech company's new office expansion, a project that would determine whether Techwell Industries could remain in their current location or be forced to relocate to a more expensive district. "Patricia," I said, sitting across from her in her chambers during her lunch break, sharing the container of homemade cookies I'd brought just like old times, "I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my heart, and I think you should hear it from me directly." I explained the entire situation with Marcus, watching her expression shift from concern to shock to barely contained rage. Patricia had always been protective of me, especially after she learned about my struggles as a single mother working multiple jobs to keep food on the table. She'd even helped me navigate the legal paperwork when I'd needed to establish Marcus as my medical power of attorney and beneficiary years earlier. "He said what?" Patricia's voice was dangerously quiet, the same tone she used in court when lawyers pushed her patients too far. "He told me I was dead to him," I repeated, allowing my voice to break slightly. "In front of his coworkers in a public lobby. He said some people know when to disappear and I needed to learn." Patricia leaned back in her chair, her jaw tight with anger. "Ruth, I need you to know that this conversation has nothing whatsoever to do with any professional matters that might come before my court. But personally, as your friend and as someone who respects the sacrifices you made for that ungrateful boy, I am absolutely appalled." The zoning appeal hearing took place 3 weeks later. Marcus's company had invested significant resources in their current location, and approval for the expansion was considered a formality by everyone involved. The application was professionally prepared, met all technical requirements, and had received preliminary approval from the City Planning Commission. Marcus sat confidently with his team of lawyers, occasionally checking his phone and whispering strategy with his colleagues. Judge Williams reviewed the application with meticulous attention to detail that surprised everyone in the courtroom. She questioned every aspect of the environmental impact study, requested additional documentation for parking requirements, demanded clarification on noise ordinances, and ultimately denied the appeal based on what she called insufficient consideration for community integration and long-term neighborhood character preservation. Marcus's company would have to relocate across town to an industrial district, a move that would cost them 6 months of lost productivity, hundreds of thousands of dollars in relocation expenses, and the loss of several key clients who found the new location inconvenient. I sat in the gallery wearing my best dress and darkest sunglasses, watching Marcus's face go white as the verdict was read. He kept glancing around the courtroom as if looking for someone to blame, someone to explain how a guaranteed approval had become a devastating rejection. When his eyes found mine in the back row, I smiled sweetly and gave him a small wave with my gloved hand. The color drained from his face completely. After the hearing, as Marcus stood in the hallway with his lawyers trying to understand what had gone wrong, I walked past him close enough that he could smell my perfume, the same lavender scent I'd worn to every important event in his life. He turned to follow me with his eyes, and I could see the first glimmer of understanding beginning to dawn. But I still wasn't done. The crowning moment of my campaign came when I approached Father Mackenzie at St. Mary's Catholic Church, where I'd been volunteering for over a decade. I organized the church rummage sales, coordinated meals for grieving families, and had personally raised over $30,000 for the new parish hall through bake sales and craft fairs. Marcus and Sarah had recently joined the parish, partly for social connections and partly because Sarah thought membership at a prestigious church would look impressive when they eventually applied for private school admission for their future children. More importantly, they'd scheduled their formal church wedding ceremony for June. A second ceremony Sarah wanted for the social prestige after their modest courthouse wedding years earlier. "Father," I said after Sunday service, requesting a private meeting in his office, "I need to discuss something very personal about my son Marcus." Father Mackenzie had baptized Marcus 28 years earlier, presided over his confirmation, and had been looking forward to officiating what he thought would be a beautiful celebration of family and faith. I'd shown him baby photos, shared stories about Marcus's academic achievements, and expressed such pride in the man I thought my son had become. I told him everything, watching his face change as he realized the scope of Marcus's betrayal. Father Mackenzie had always preached about honoring your parents, about the sacred bonds of family, about caring for the elderly and vulnerable members of the community. "Ruth," he said softly when I finished, "I am so very sorry. This is not the young man I thought I knew at all. I don't want to cause problems for the church," I said carefully. "I know you've already made commitments and plans, but I felt you should know the truth about the people you're blessing with this sacred ceremony." Father Mackenzie was quiet for a long time, his hands folded in prayer position as he considered my words. Finally, he looked up with sadness in his eyes. "A man who would treat his mother this way," he said slowly, "is not someone I can in good conscience unite in holy matrimony. Marriage is about love, sacrifice, and honoring the bonds that make us family. How can I bless a union for someone who has broken the most fundamental family bond of all?" The following week, Marcus received a letter from the church stating that after prayerful consideration and reflection on the sacred nature of matrimony, Father Mackenzie would not be able to officiate their wedding ceremony. The letter was professionally worded but devastating in its implications. In a community where church connections mattered deeply, being quietly dropped by the parish priest was a social death sentence. Sarah's carefully planned society wedding was suddenly in ruins. The venue they'd booked specifically required a Catholic ceremony to secure their preferred June date. The catering had been arranged, the flowers ordered, the invitations already sent to 200 guests, including dozens of prominent church members and community leaders who would immediately notice the absence of Father Mackenzie's blessing. But my piece de resistance came when I made one final call to my friend Janet Patterson at the Daily Herald. Janet had been writing the Society column for 15 years, and she'd always included mentions of my volunteer work, my fundraising efforts, and my contributions to the community. She also handled wedding announcements, charity event coverage, and the kind of social reporting that mattered deeply to people like Sarah who craved public recognition. "Janet," I said when she answered her direct line, "I need to tell you something about my family situation that might affect your future coverage decisions." I explained everything to Janet, who listened with the sharp attention of a seasoned reporter who recognized a story when she heard one. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment and I could hear her typing notes in the background. "Ruth," she said finally, "I want you to know that I've always admired your strength and your generosity to this community. You've been the backbone of so many charitable efforts over the years. What Marcus has done is not just inexcusable, it's a betrayal of everything you represent. I just wanted you to know," I said, "in case their names come up for social coverage in the future. I can't in good conscience pretend everything is fine when my own son has erased me from his life so completely." Janet's next Society column, published that Sunday, included a lengthy feature about longtime community volunteers and their often unrecognized contributions to local families. My work at the diner, my fundraising efforts for various causes, my decades of quiet service were highlighted prominently. The article mentioned how volunteers like me often sacrifice their own comfort and security to lift up others, including their own children, only to find themselves forgotten and discarded when success comes calling. The column didn't mention Marcus by name, but in a town of 30,000 people where everyone knew everyone else's business, the reference was crystal clear. The subtle condemnation was more devastating than any direct attack could have been, because it came wrapped in praise for my character and service. Within 2 months of my campaign, Marcus's perfectly constructed life was crumbling like a house built on sand. His business was forced to relocate at enormous cost, disrupting client relationships and eating into profits. His half-finished home addition remained stalled with no contractor willing to take on the abandoned work at any reasonable price. Sarah's fertility treatments were delayed indefinitely, straining their marriage and destroying her dreams of starting a family. Their social standing in the community had evaporated like morning mist. Their dream wedding was cancelled, deposits lost, relationships damaged. The final blow came when Marcus received a certified letter from my attorney, a letter I'd been planning and refining since the day he told me I was dead to him. Inside was a formal revocation of all legal documents that named him as my beneficiary, my medical power of attorney, and my emergency contact. Also included was a copy of my new will, which left my entire estate to the Riverside Women's Shelter, and a restraining order that legally prevented him from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my apartment building. But the most devastating part of the letter was the final paragraph, which I'd written myself. As per your express wishes communicated on March 15th at Techwell Industries, Mrs. Ruth Patterson is removing herself from your existence completely. This includes all financial, legal, medical, and social connections that previously existed between you. You stated that she was dead to you and needed to stop existing in your world. This document makes that legally binding and permanent. Your mother no longer exists in your world as you requested. Marcus called me that night, his voice shaking so badly I could barely understand his words. The number appeared on my caller ID, but I let it ring, watching the phone light up again and again. He called 17 times in 2 hours, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that I deleted without listening to completely. By his own request, I was dead to him, and dead people don't answer phones. The next morning, I woke up to find him sitting on the steps outside my apartment building, still wearing yesterday's rumpled clothes, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained with what looked like tears or rain. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate, darting between my window and the front door like a man waiting for a miracle that would never come. I watched from behind my curtains as he waited there for hours, occasionally calling my name toward my window, holding up his phone to show me he was trying to call, looking up at my apartment with the kind of raw anguish I'd felt during those long nights when he'd first started pushing me away. Finally, after he'd been there for nearly 6 hours, I went downstairs. He stood up quickly when he saw me, hope flooding his face like sunrise after the longest night of winter. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the word like it was something fragile he was afraid to drop. I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd raised from infancy, this stranger who'd tried to erase me from existence. "I don't have a son," I said quietly. "You made sure of that." "Please," he said, reaching toward me with trembling hands. I didn't mean what I said. I was stressed about work, I was angry about Sarah's pressure. I wasn't thinking clearly. I never meant for things to go this far. "You said I was dead to you," I replied, my voice steady as stone. "You told me to disappear, to stop existing in your world. So I did. This is what disappearing looks like, Marcus. This is what death feels like." His face crumpled like paper in a fire. "I was wrong. I was horrible. I'm so sorry, Mom. Please forgive me." "Sorry doesn't bring back the dead," I said, turning toward the door. "What do you want?" he called after me, desperation making his voice crack like a teenager's. "What will it take to fix this? I'll do anything. I'll pay for therapy, I'll quit my job, I'll divorce Sarah if that's what it takes. Just tell me what you want." I stopped and looked back at him one last time, this grown man reduced to begging on a sidewalk because he'd finally learned what loss really meant. "You taught me that love has conditions," I said slowly. "That family is disposable when it becomes inconvenient. That a mother's sacrifice means nothing when a son decides he's outgrown her. That people can be declared dead while they're still breathing. You can't unteach those lessons, Marcus. You can't take back words that cut that deep." Then I walked inside and locked the door behind me, leaving him alone on the sidewalk with the wreckage of everything he'd built on the foundation of my sacrifices, everything he'd thought he owned but had only borrowed from someone he'd thrown away. 6 months later, I was arranging fresh daisies in my small apartment when Mrs. Chin from the bakery downstairs knocked on my door with gossip and a plate of warm croissants. She told me that Marcus and Sarah had separated, that the stress of their collapsing social life, the financial pressure from his business problems, and the strain of their cancelled wedding plans had finally broken them apart like a rope pulled too tight. He'd moved into a small efficiency apartment across town, she said, working for a company that didn't know his history, starting over in a place where no one remembered the boy I'd raised or the woman who'd raised him. Sarah had moved back to her parents' house in Riverside Heights, her dreams of social prominence and perfect family photos scattered like leaves in winter wind. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Not satisfaction, not sadness, not even the hollow ache of old wounds. Just the quiet emptiness that comes when you finally stop caring about someone who stopped caring about you first. Tyler Morrison, my neighbor's grandson, had started visiting me regularly around that time. He was 17, a senior at Riverside High, applying for colleges while working part-time at Miller's Diner where I'd spent so many years serving coffee to people who mattered. Tyler reminded me of Marcus at that age. Eager, hardworking, full of dreams that seemed too big for a small town to contain. I helped him with his college essays, sharing stories about working your way through hardship and never giving up on education. I taught him to cook the comfort foods that sustain you when life gets hard. Pot roast that falls apart with a fork, cornbread that soaks up gravy like a sponge, apple pie with lattice crust that takes patience to weave properly. "Why are you helping me?" he asked one evening as we worked on his scholarship applications at my small kitchen table. "You don't even know me that well." "Because that's what mothers do," I said simply, looking up from the application we were reviewing. "We raise the children who need raising, whether they're ours by blood or by choice." He nodded thoughtfully, his pen poised over the personal statement section. My mom says you used to have a son. I raised a boy once, I said, looking out the window at the sunset painting the sky the color of old roses. But sons aren't guaranteed just because you give birth to them. Some children grow up to honor the love that raised them. Others grow up to bury it alive. Tyler got accepted to State University's engineering program that spring, the same program Marcus had attended 20 years earlier. I sold my mother's silver tea service to help with his dorm costs, just like I'd done for Marcus, but this time felt different, cleaner, because Tyler understood what a gift looks like when someone else's hands have bled to give it to you. The day Tyler left for college, he hugged me tight enough to crack my ribs and said, I won't forget what you've done for me, Mrs. Patterson. When I graduate, you'll be in the front row. I know you won't forget, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. That evening, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the stars come out over a town where I'd learned the difference between being a mother and raising a child who remembers what motherhood means. Somewhere across town, Marcus was learning what it felt like to be forgotten, to have the foundation of your life disappear piece by piece, to discover that everything you thought you owned was actually borrowed from someone you'd thrown away like yesterday's newspaper.